I'm Rivka Kahan, and we're going to use al-Torah resources to explore the story of Miriam's critique of Moshe, which is found toward the end of Parshat Beha'alotcha, to understand the rich messages about Moshe's nevuah and leadership and personal relationships that are imparted by this short narrative. Let's begin by looking together at the psukim in which the Torah tells us the story in Bamidbar Perek Yud Bet. We're going to click on Tanakh and then on Mikraot Gedolot. We'll click here to choose our text, which is Bamidbar Perek Yud Bet, and we'll click on this icon to see only the psukim for now. The Torah tells us V'tidaber Miriam v'Aaron b'Moshe al odot ha'isha ha'Cushite asher lakach ki isha Cushite lakach. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moshe about the Isha Cushite, the Ethiopian woman that he married, because he married an Isha Cushite. V'yomru harak ach b'Moshe diber Hashem halo gam banu diber v'yishma Hashem. And they said, did Hashem only speak with Moshe? Didn't he also speak with us? And Hashem heard what they said. And the Torah goes on to tell us that Hashem defends Moshe strongly against their criticism. He explains that Moshe's nevuah is on a higher and more direct level than that of any other Navi. That while other Naviim understand Hashem's words through visions and through dreams, Lo Kain Avdi Moshe, B'chol Beiti Ne'emanhu. Moshe is different. He is the most faithful in all of Hashem's house. And Hashem speaks to him directly, peh el peh. So there are a number of questions that come out of these psukim. The first is, who is this Isha Cushite to whom Miriam and Aaron are referring? Is it Tzipporah, Moshe's wife, whom we've already encountered in the Torah, or are they speaking about a different wife? Second, we understand that they're criticizing some aspect of Moshe's marriage or of his behavior within his marriage. But what exactly are they criticizing? And third, we've seen that there are a number of psukim in this parak about Moshe's nevuah. Miriam and Aaron refer to it at Pasuk Bet, and all of Hashem's speech in defense of Moshe centers on the notion that Moshe's nevuah is on a more exalted and more direct level than that of any other Navi. So what is the connection between Moshe's nevuah and the criticism that Miriam and Aaron level against him? We're going to delve into these questions through the lens of Parshanut. We'll consider the perspectives of Rashi and Rav Yosef ibn Kaspi and Rav Yosef Bechor Shor. But before we do that, let's look at some background information that the Torah has already given us about Moshe's relationship with Tzipporah. Let's look together at Shmot, Perek Yud Chet, Pasuk Bet, and we're going to look in the Mikraot Gedolot to see some of the words of our Mefarshim. The Torah tells us, Vayikach Yitro chotein Moshe et Tzipporah eshet Moshe achar shiluchaha. That Yitro brought Tzipporah back to Moshe after she had been sent away. This is taking place after Yetziat Mitzrayim, that they returned to Moshe. So it becomes clear from the Pshat in the Torah that there was some separation between Moshe and Tzipporah earlier in their relationship. If we look at Rashi's interpretation of this achar shiluchaha, of the separation that's referred to in this pasuk, we see that Rashi tells us that Moshe originally brought Tzipporah with him from Midian to Mitzrayim, but immediately at the urging of Aaron sent her back, and that he stayed to engage in the process of Yetziat Mitzrayim on his own, and that they were reunited after Yetziat Mitzrayim. If we look at the Midrash, at the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael, we see that there's another opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua. The Midrash says, Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Achar sheniftara mimenu beget, that they were actually divorced, that Moshe gave Tzipporah a get, and that when they were reunited in Perek Yud Chet, presumably, it was not so much that the Torah is telling us that they were reunited, but that Moshe was reunited with his children, with the rest of his family. So we see that there are two different interpretations of this separation, either that they were separated during the process of Yetziat Mitzrayim, but then reunited, or that they were actually divorced. So we'll keep in mind these two interpretations as we consider the Mefarshim on our parak of Bamidbar Yud Bet. Let's go back to Bamidbar Yud Bet and consider the approach of Rashi to our psukim and how he understands them. So Rashi, in his Pirush on the psukim in Perek Yud Bet, explains that his view is that the Isha Cushite is Tzipporah, is Moshe's wife whom we've already encountered, and that the reason that Miriam is criticizing their marriage is because Moshe has separated from Tzipporah in order to be able to always be ready for Hashem's revelation and nevuah. And Miriam and Aaron don't understand why that's necessary, since they're also Nevi'im, and they don't need to separate from their spouses. One of the great strengths of Rashi's approach is that he seamlessly weaves together the critique of Moshe's marriage with the psukim about Nevuah, because he understands that the critique of Moshe's marriage is about his separation, which was connected to his need to be constantly ready for Nevuah. And so therefore, when Miriam and Aaron equate themselves with Moshe in terms of Nevuah, and when Hashem responds by saying, no, your Nevuah is not like Moshe's, he's on a higher and unique level of Nevuah, all of that is directly connected with the critique of Moshe's marriage. The weakness of Rashi's approach, of course, is that it requires associating Tzipora with the Isha Cushite, whereas we know that Tzipora was not from Cush, she was from Midian. So Rashi reads the phrase Isha Cushite figuratively, as referring to Tzipora in some sort of figurative sense. He explains that she was considered an Isha Cushite, she was referred to with that phrase, because she was incontrovertibly beautiful, in the same way that someone who's from Ethiopia is universally acknowledged to be black. And he says that Cushite is the gematria Yafat Mareh. So the gematria of Cushite is beautiful, and Tzipora was beautiful in the same way that someone from Ethiopia is recognized to be black. That is Rashi's approach. And we see again that the great strength is the way in which he connects the psukim about the Nevuah to the critique of the marriage, but the weakness is the way in which he is required to interpret Pasuk Aleph in a way that doesn't seem entirely consistent with the simple reading of the psukim of Pasuk Aleph. Now let's look at another interpretation, the interpretation of Rav Yosef ibn Kasbi, who begins by disagreeing strongly with Rashi's interpretation for a couple of reasons. First, he points out that Rashi's interpretation requires reading words to mean the opposite of what they seem to mean on the literal level. So first of all, it requires reading Cushite to mean beautiful, which is not what it means. And it also requires reading the word lakach in Pasuk Aleph to mean not that they got married, but that they were separated, which again is not what the word means. In fact, in this case, is the opposite of what it means. Ibn Kasbi, in his Perush on Pasuk Gimel, also disagrees with Rashi on philosophical grounds. Ibn Kasbi points out that celibacy is not a value of Judaism, and that in fact Chazal subscribed to the notion that Kol HaGadol Mechaveiro Yitzro Gadol Himenu, that people of greatness actually have a great passion and even a strong Yetzer Hara, which would be at odds with the concept of embracing celibacy as a value for our greatest leaders. Instead, Ibn Kasbi suggests that the Isha Cushite was an Isha Cushite. She was an Ethiopian woman whom Moshe married later after his marriage to Tzipora. And he suggests that the reason that Miriam and Aaron criticized this marriage was because they didn't think that it was appropriate for Moshe to engage in polygamy, but that they were incorrect because they mistakenly equated their own level of wisdom and nevuah with that of Moshe's. In fact, Moshe had a good reason, even if we don't know what it was, for entering into this marriage, and Miriam and Aaron were mistaken in thinking that they could evaluate Moshe's reason. And that then Hashem defends Moshe by pointing out the greater level of wisdom and nevuah that characterizes Moshe, to point out to Miriam and Aaron that they have no right to criticize or evaluate Moshe's actions. Now let's turn to one other interpretation, which has some commonalities with Ibn Kasbi, but goes in a slightly different direction. This is the interpretation of the Bechor Shor. So the Bechor Shor, in his Perush, says, Al davar ha'isha ha'kushit asher lakach, lefi hapshat shahayu omrim, v'chi lo matza Moshe isha mibnot Yisrael, shikach lo l'isha, shahalach lakachat lo mibnot ha'kushim, shehem arilim, וכי בשביל שהקדוש ברוך הוא מדבר עמו מתגאה שאינו רוצה לישא אישה מבנות ישראל שביקש אישה במרחק. So the Bechor Shor, like Ibn Kasbi, believes that Moshe has married a second wife, a woman from Cush, and that is the reason that he is being criticized by Miriam and Aaron. Except he believes that they're not criticizing him for polygamy, but rather for intermarriage, for having married a woman who is not Jewish. And that they believe that he mistakenly thinks of himself as being on such a high level that he's able to do things that other people wouldn't do. And then Hashem defends him by pointing out that he actually is on a high enough level to be able to make these decisions without other people evaluating them. And So the Bechor Shor also points out that the reason that Miriam did not criticize Moshe's marriage to Tzipporah, which was also a marriage to a non-Jewish woman, is that at that point in Moshe's life he really had no other options. But at this point he does. So we've seen that altogether there are three different approaches that we've considered. One is Rashi, who suggests that the criticism was about Moshe's separation from Tzipporah, and that the reason for that separation was due to the high level of Moshe's Nevuah. Keeping in mind the background that we learned earlier from Shmot Parak Yud Chet, it's interesting that Rashi here is consistent with his approach there. In both cases, Rashi believes that fulfilling Hashem's mission required Moshe to take a step back from his marriage and from his personal life. We've seen that Ibn Kasbi and Bechor Shor agree that the marriage that's described here is not the marriage to Tzipporah, but to a second wife, a woman from Cush, but that they disagree about what was objectionable about that marriage. That in the view of Ibn Kasbi, what was objectionable is that Moshe is engaging in polygamy, while in the view of Bechor Shor, what's objectionable is that he is intermarrying with a woman who is not Jewish. And in general, I think we can suggest that while Rashi's interpretation is a little bit hard to reconcile with Pasuk Aleph of the Parak, it works seamlessly and beautifully with the other Psukim in the Parak about the Nevuah, whereas the Perushim of Ibn Kasbi and Bechor Shor work very well with Pasuk Aleph and really seem to read that Pasuk in the most Pashtani way possible, but at the same time perhaps are not quite as directly connected and as seamlessly woven together with the other Psukim of the Parak about the Nevuah. According to all of these Mefarshim, the Pshat is implying that the source of Miriam's and Aaron's mistake, is that they don't recognize the level of Moshe's Nevuah and how qualitatively different it is from their own and from that of other Nevi'im. And I think that this story, broadly speaking, however we interpret it, gives us perspective on Moshe's unique experience both of Nevuah and of life, the way in which he's alone and misunderstood even by the people closest to him because of the uniqueness and the closeness and intensity of his Nevuah and his relationship with Hashem and the demands of his leadership. It's interesting to consider whether this narrative is meant to be a step in the questioning and undermining of Moshe's leadership at the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar that culminates in Chet HaMeraglim, or if it's really another perspective that should be read separately that focuses more on Moshe's personal life and personal relationships with the people closest to him. To learn more about this topic and about others, please visit al-hatorah.org. Thank you.